Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk, you wanna talk.
Welcome back, friends. We got a few minutes left to spend with Dr. Tues, Greg Howard, and Chief Steve. And I want to talk about a topic that is not being talked about by many. For the first time in a long time, we will have a black American, Tim Scott from South Carolina, in the United States Senate. A 100-member group that hasn't seen anyone black since Carol Moseley Braun, whatever her name was, who was probably the poorest excuse for an intelligent life form in the history of this country, and dishonest, disingenuous, and whatever. But they made a huge deal about the fact she was in the Senate. Huge deal. She was in every story that they talked about, and every move she made until she did wrong things and they ignored it. Tim Scott he's in the House. He was elected in South Carolina to be in the House as a Republican. He's now been appointed by another minority lady, the governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, whose parents are from India. And most of the major networks have totally ignored it. And a guy, and this is really the reason I want to bring this up, who's a radio and television talk host, who's a friend of mine, who was co-host with me, or I co-host with him for several years, a guy named Amos Brown, said, oh, Tim Scott is black in name only. Just like that ESPN black commentator said that RG3 is a cornball black because he has a white fiance and he might be a Republican. The hypocrisy, the lunacy, the disingenuity, and the downright stupidity of the left is never more obvious than when they say north and then run like hell due south. I'll start with you, Dr. Tues.
Well, I guess the thing that I have mostly noticed about Tim Scott is that he has a background and record that appears to be authentically conservative. He has been a champion of the Second Amendment, a champion of pro-life, a defender of the natural rights of family. So I'll be watching with great interest, Stan. And I guess all of the hoopla that is or isn't made about somebody's skin color and their racial background and all of this, it just doesn't play that much of a role in my thinking. I think it's just often used these days to try to manipulate people from one side or the other in order to prove something. And that, of course, shouldn't be the point of an election to the U.S. Senate or any other office. You should be looking at a person and saying, oh, who is this person and what do they stand for and what are they likely to do? And so at one level, I look at it and I say, well, that's interesting. That's encouraging. Do you know the discouraging thing about it, though, Stan? The discouraging thing about it is that he's a Republican. And my experience of the Republican Party is that they take people like this and turn them bad. So I'll be watching and thinking about this and hoping and praying and of course open to other things if anybody were interested. But the point being, though, that I have watched so many good people just like this with good records and solid commitment, go into the cauldron of this corruption that is now this one faction sick party system, and they get turned. And you end up watching as they pay lip service to the things they used to believe, but go along with a corrupt leadership until they just become mouthpieces, putting a nice ornament of the appearance of the commitment to principle on what is the abandonment of principle. I'm praying to the Lord that that's not going to happen in this case. And that somebody with a good, solid record and heart for the real principles that this country was founded on, will stand by those things after he gets smacked around by the sick-minded leadership that will want him to go on talking a good game while he walks with them to betray everything he's working for. That's been the pattern, sadly, of a lot of these folks, especially, by the way, in the U.S. Senate. And I speak from experience. I don't want to go into names and stuff right now. Some of them you would know, but it's just too much. My heart broken too many times not to understand that this isn't just something to be applauded. It's something to be prayed over in the hope that there will be some grace in this situation that will help Tim Scott, and I'll be praying for him, to withstand the deep pressures of morbid corruption that will now beset him as people try to use him for the purpose of dressing up a party that has in fact abandoned its very soul.
Well
we'll
said. But I think his mentor, Jim DeMint, is possibly a good example of a guy who has told leadership to pound sand, and that may be one of the reasons he's stepping down, because it's a thankless task.
I think that's right. And that's why I say I'm praying and hoping. So this is what I've been thinking about. You know, I'm in a position now, I think it's the position of a lot of people. I'm just not willing to jump up and applaud and get on the bandwagon anymore. I want to see, I want to help if anybody's interested in asking for help, but and do whatever I can. But I just don't know. And I think that's far more important than the color of Tim Scott's skin, which everybody's going to be trying to make hay out of. After all, you did leave out an important fact. I know that it's you know, as someone said, he's not that black, but he is, in the color of his skin, identifiably a person who has that African heritage in him. That's Barack Obama. And he was in the Senate. And they did make a big deal about him, as you'll recall. So I think remembering that was his provender, I'm also reminded of the fact that what you could have said rightly is that this is the first black American in the Senate since Carol Moseley Braun. Because Barack Obama, as he should admit, is an hyphenated American. He's an African American. I am not a hyphenated American. He's an American who looks back to a heritage different than mine, and who therefore does not take seriously the parts of American history that were involved with that heritage. I think that's one of the reasons he has so steadfastly been willing to abandon and betray everything that previous generations of black Americans who fought for liberty and who fought for justice stood for. And Tim Scott's different. So firmly rooted in that heritage, I hope he will become one of the folks who stands with boldness to speak for it, for the leadership in the black community's fight for justice, as Martin Luther King exemplifies, as Frederick Douglass exemplifies, as Sojourner Truth exemplifies. That leadership was a deeply God-fearing, God-committed, Jesus-loving leadership. And that's exactly what Barack Obama is not.
By any stretch of the imagination. Greg?
Well, there's not much to add to that except for the fact that I agree that every time we see someone go into the Republican machine, I don't know what happens to them, where their values get lost, what change in values occurs, but somehow the machine seems to change them. I am thrilled that he is, in fact, a Tea Party-type conservative, and I do this based on a review of his past record, as well as a person that is a good friend of mine from nearby Ozark, Alabama, who is in politics, lower-level politics, who has vouched for him, someone I trust deeply, who says they know him personally, and I will take this person at their word. But again, too many people have gone into the Republican machine and come out rhinos in very little time. Of course, you know, I'm not so sure I like this word rhino, because I think rhino is the natural state of Republicans, and we may be asking Republicans to be something they are not. When we look back at the history of the Republican Party, we look at the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party, and this leaning towards progressivism and big government control with just a slightly different look to it is really the natural state of Republicans from what I see. So I really don't know that it is fair to call them rhinos when they really probably are just being their natural state And we're probably asking as conservatives for them to be something that they truly cannot be. It is not really in the party DNA.
Well said. Chief?
Well, both of these comments have been by Dr. Keyes and Greg are right on the money. I was thinking about something that Ronald Reagan said when he was a Democrat at one time and said that he didn't leave the Democrat Party, the party left him. And me being a Republican my whole life, I feel the same way. I feel like I never left, but they've left me. And here we are. But Tim Scott caught my eye a long time ago. I got a daughter that went to college in South Carolina. She stayed there, going to get married there in March. And so when I saw Tim Scott on television the first time, he was from South Carolina, I paid attention, really liked what he had to say. And I think he's right on the money. I'm really happy for him. He deserves this. And I think after what Dr. Keyes has said, he does deserve this. He deserves this shot. And we should support him in this shot. But it's up to him now to be tough and to do what he's supposed to do. And remember that he's a servant of us. And he's supposed to do what we need and not what he needs to do. And hopefully he'll do that.
Well, I think that's well said. And I think that he's filling some major shoes. Jim DeMint was a champion of conservative values, of God-fearing, constitutionally based values, and he has worked very hard and has made a lot of difference. I can only hope that he'll make more difference. And he was hated by the Republican leadership. I mean, to the point of being downright impolite, if you will. And the Senate, that's quite something, where they hold hands, I think, to keep from killing each other, but they always treat each other with great affection, even though there's no reason, in my opinion, for that to be the case. All right, let's move to the next topic, and that has to do with well, really back to the gun situation. I believe, someone said that there were 3 guns for every person in America. I think they're low. I think there's probably 10, and I think shortly there'll be 50. I think that the best investment you can make today is not gold. It is, in fact, guns and ammunition. Now, this isn't a typical topic, yet it is, if you will, if you are not armed with a love, respect, and belief in God, you have no shot. And if you are not armed with a firearm and ammunition, you have no shot, if you'll pardon the pun. Dr. Keyes.
Well, I think, and we were reminded of this a few minutes ago, that the key to this issue is really for people to rediscover that word that's in the Second Amendment, which was not just a word at the time of our founding. It was an institution and a reality. It was called the militia. And the militia was not some kind of this or that organization that you could point to and say, like the Army, that's the militia. No. It was simply a concept where you looked at the folks who were capable of bearing arms in a community, remembering that these were communities that were still very much, a lot of them, in a frontier environment. There were some very settled communities right along the east that had been founded for quite a while and so forth, but America still was a country that required that people be aware that threats could arise at any moment that would break up the peace of their community. And the militia, by the way, was not about privilege. It was about obligation. That's what was said a minute ago. That's what was done in Kennesaw. It was a reminder that, as the amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And that free state is not just a reference to government. It's a reference to the condition, the state of being free. Can't keep it if you don't have a well-regulated militia. And well-regulated means well-disciplined morally and in terms of the use of arms. And so there was an obligation on the part of individuals who had the capacity to do so, to put themselves in readiness and to join together at the local level in order to practice the skills that were needed as appropriate to their time. I have always been, Stan, in favor of reinstituting that concept throughout this country. I think we defeat the terrorists, we defeat these mad, wicked gunmen, and we would not only do that, people would rediscover a new respect for themselves as they rediscovered the discipline. Instead of being afraid of guns the way these leftist and sellout rhino ideologues want us to be, we would, ceasing to be afraid of ourselves and fearing only God, have the confidence to take up the training and discipline needed to defend our children and defend our classrooms and defend our community the way we're supposed to as Americans. And that concept of militia, I think, needs to be revived. It needs to be explored. It needs to be reinstituted, starting at the local level in this country, throughout the country, because that's where it's appropriately done. And we should start looking at it when people are 15, 16, 17 years old, so that at no point as able-bodied men and women will people be afraid of the instruments of self-defense. And finally, do you know why they're afraid? They're making people afraid of those instruments because they're afraid of themselves. See, when I hear about an episode like this terrible tragedy in Connecticut, guess what never occurs to me? It never occurs to me at all for a moment that I would be that gunman, that I would so lose control of my moral self that I'd go around slaughtering innocent children. Do you think that folks raised in this environment of easy hedonism and of surrender in fantasy to all kinds of sick violence, do you think that in their heart of hearts a lot of these people are saying to themselves, I could never do that, when in point of fact they have been kind of, giving in to that side of themselves in various ways for quite some time in their youth and so forth? Maybe they don't really subconsciously trust themselves anymore, Stan. And not trusting yourself, you don't trust yourself in a situation where you'd have constant and steady access to an instrument that could then be used for wickedness. Do you know what produces the confidence? What produces the confidence is the sense you have of your own moral integrity and discipline. And we need systematically to restore in our education at every level what's needed in order to raise up in our citizens that sense of self-respect, self-discipline, self-control, which then will prevent any of these blowhard, tyranny-minded politicians from leading our people to be so afraid of the means of self-defense that they would actually let government and wicked people government is now willing to arm, as we have seen with this administration, have a monopoly on the means of self-defense.
Unbelievably correct. Greg?
Absolutely right. The biggest problem we have in this country, however, is people have no idea what is coming for them if they give up their right to be armed and their right to self-defense and their right to protect themselves. The Second Amendment was not only about protecting your community and protecting your home. It was also the balance of power between the people and the government if all else failed, if the First Amendment failed, if the Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment failed. If everything else failed, the Second Amendment was the final fail-safe. And we are at the point where I'm scared. Well, I don't like to use the word scared because I'm not scared, but I fear that we may have a situation occur where we may have to see that final fail-safe come into play. And I hope that that is not the case. But the longer that the people remain silent and do not stand up to the tyranny, and I wonder why they sit back so quietly, waiting for the final yoke to fall on their shoulders. Because they say, well, we don't want to have to get violent. But they do not understand that by their very silence, by the refusal to rise up and speak loudly in an unmistakable voice, while there still is speaking to be done, they're setting it up so that violence may, in fact, be the only resort left. And I don't understand it, but people need to understand all the purposes that went through our founders' minds when they set up this important Second Amendment. It was not about hunting. It was not about just necessarily keeping bad guys out of your house. It was not just about defending your community. It was also about the final check in power against a tyrannical government.
Absolutely correct. Chief?
Several years ago, someone sued the police department because they were a victim of a crime. The Supreme Court actually heard that case, and the Supreme Court ruled that the police were not liable because they can't be everywhere. And so you think about that, most times when people are victims of crimes, the police are not there. So the liberals on the left, the socialists on the left, that they want us to rely only on the police for protection, it will not protect us. And they can't be everywhere. They won't be everywhere. And besides that, we don't want them everywhere. We don't want the police at our homes all the time, 24 hours a day. But say, on top of that, the Christian side of this also says that the Christian, I'm a Christian, the Christians have been too silent in all of these issues. We must speak out. We can no longer be the silent majority. We must become the vocal majority, because the left, while they have a bad message, have been better at spreading their message than we have. We've got to get good at spreading our message and also standing up for what is right, and one of those is the Second Amendment.
On that note, we're going to call it a night. I want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, best wishes for the upcoming year, the upcoming decade, the upcoming century, the upcoming future. May God communicate with you so that you know the difference between right and wrong. Just around the horn, very quick, we have 2 minutes. Alan.
Well, I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Christmas, but also a Christmas, I think, in which they will take themselves before God to really accept the deep providence that Jesus Christ represents, pointing towards salvation and encouraging us through every time to understand that God has on offer always His grace and help.
Greg?
I also echo that, and remember that the reason for the season is, in fact, Jesus Christ and what He came to earth to do. And in that light, I do wish not only all Christians a Merry Christmas, but also the ACLU. I'd like to wish you a very Merry Christmas, and I hope that one day your eyes will be opened as well.
Yeah, I hope that's just the day before you go to hell. Chief.
Amen to those comments. I've been very blessed. I want to wish and pray that everyone will find the peace and love that Jesus Christ offers, and also the courage that the faith of God can empower you with to go forward and spread His good word and His good deeds.
Good night, world. Good night, America. Good night, my wonderful guest. And we will be off for 2 weeks, so we'll see you all next year.